coffee.
Well, if no one's gonna drink this, maybe I'll just... Ugh, that's terrible. That's...
Good morning. This is Morning Coffee with the Chief. I am Patrick Jordan, a 38-year veteran of law enforcement. But not only am I a veteran of law enforcement, but I'm the son of a police officer, the brother of a police officer, the nephew of a deputy sheriff, and the brother-in-law of a sheriff. I've been asked to host this show where we go over law enforcement-related movies and television shows with some friends. We relate it to our own experiences and what is going on today. I'm also on the board of the LA mission. As you can see on your screen, I'm asking you guys to go to the LosAngelesmission.org and look up their website. They do some great work in downtown Los Angeles. There's probably the highest concentration of homeless is in downtown Los Angeles in Skid Row. A lot of people hooked on fentanyl, methamphetamine, people with mental health issues. And the LA mission, the Los Angeles mission, has been servicing that community for the last 85 years. They give about 400,000 meals a year. They provide temporary housing or beds for people who want to get off the street, at least for a little while. And they provide places where they can get a shower and get cleaned up and maybe some clothing, meet some of their basic needs. And they also do intervention. So when somebody's ready to get off the streets, they'll allow them, or they'll give them the chance to get off the street and give them a little more permanent housing and wraparound services to get them integrated back into our society. They have a faith-based element to their curriculum, and they get no direct funding from government. So they need your help. If you can find your way to their website, make a donation of $50 or $25, every now and then, you'll be doing a good service for those folks who need some help. On today's shows, we got a couple of great guests with us who are going to help us go over the show. The very first one is Chief Steve McLean. Let's bring Steve up. I'll talk a little bit about his career as he comes up. Steve is a 40-year veteran of law enforcement. He retired most recently from Baldwin Hills Police Department as the chief. He was the chief of the city of Fillmore in Ventura County. And before that, he retired as a captain from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. And I'm excited to have Steve on because Steve was a special operator for many years. He was part of our special weapons teams, commonly referred to as SWAT by a lot of folks. And he brings some expertise to us that we are going to need today in our movie Heat. As you guys know, it's got an iconic shootout scene between law enforcement and the bad guys. And Steve can bring some insight into what's going on in the movie, but also some of the changes in law enforcement that occurred after that shootout. And that, of course, shootout occurred after this movie. So as I've said on many shows before, sometimes culture influences the movie and sometimes the movie influences culture. Steve's got a side gig going on right now, and I think he's at his facility getting it ready. Can you tell us a little bit about that, Steve?
Yes, thank you. Well, everybody knows that since the Supreme Court said that everybody has a right to carry a weapon, you no longer have to prove cause. So essentially, all you got to say is, I want a weapon, and if you meet the criteria, you get one. So what I'm seeing in my community is there are hundreds and hundreds of citizens that are carrying weapons. And the issue that I see is the criteria for passing is a joke. I mean, you just 3 yards, 5 yards, 7 yards. Well, the problem is that doesn't make you proficient with a weapon. That's like saying if you take one karate lesson, that makes you a black belt. And so what I envisioned was a facility where people can go and get a higher and better level of training. And so we are a security guard and firearms training center. And so we're qualified to issue the CCW, Utah CCW, as well as security guard and guard card with permit. But basically, to be here so people can learn about how to operate a weapon, not only responsible, but safely. And we also got programs for families and for children.
Okay, Steve, what's your timeline for getting up and running?
We'll be open in about 4 weeks.
In about 4 weeks. What's the name? Have you guys got a name yet?
Yes, LA County Security Guard and Firearms Academy.
Okay.
And we're only one in North LA County that's owned and operated by cops. We have a total of 160 years of law enforcement experience, which includes 2 retired chiefs and 3 former SWAT team members, as well as a veteran Vietnam Force Recon Marine.
One of the question I wanted to ask you, I mean, there's a whole bunch of questions I want to ask about this whole Second Amendment Supreme Court stuff and this battle between California and the Supreme Court as this goes on. As most people who own weapons or want to carry a concealed weapon, the rules are changing in California constantly because they've decided to fight the Supreme Court decision. But the thing that is most relevant to whether you get a CCW permit or you own a weapon is the need for training. And I really do believe just training on how to keep your weapon safe, how to handle it safely, actually training for each different weapon that you have, because revolvers and automatic handguns are different than rifles, and rifles and shotguns are different. So getting trained on each one of those weapons is paramount in my opinion. And if you end up in a shooting, you will react how you're trained. If you're not trained, then you'll be lost in that shooting. Do you want to respond to that comment at all?
Yes. Having a weapon and shooting a gun is a perishable skill. You know, if you don't go to the range, I say at least a couple of times a week, then you're going to lose that skill. Yeah, and you also not only have to do target shooting, but you need to get in what I call combat shooting. If you get in a real shooting, it's going to be maximum stress. So you've got to be able to have training to put you under stress, where you address multiple targets, where you've got to do numerous magazine exchanges, and you've got to be able to fire your weapon from multiple positions. For example, you're on the ground, you're on your back, you're standing, you're prone, left hand, right hand. And so you need to learn all that in case you get in one of those situations.
If you haven't done anything like that and you get in a situation, you're going to get sued. So it's best to have some training so you show that you tried to do something, tried to meet some basic level of proficiency with your firearm. I also think you ought to probably get some insurance. But it's probably next. We're going to need to bring up our next guest, Cliff Yates. Cliff is a retired sergeant from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, and I think he was a New York State trooper as well. He is a California refugee in that he has migrated to Florida, DeSantis country. He says he's happy as hell there. It's going to be 89 degrees there, and he's enjoying it. But Cliff is very interesting. He's written a book. He's also a stand-up comedian, and he now has his own podcast. And we'll let Cliff talk a little bit about that. Cliff, why don't you tell us what's going on with you today?
Hey, thanks, Chief. It's good to have coffee with you again. I don't know if you remember, it's been over 20 years since you and I had coffee at the Universal City Walk, where we were both working West Hollywood Station. I remember the day we sat down and had coffee with Sergeant Telmo, and we had a nice talk together. Now here we are back again. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, I'm loving Florida. I'm loving retired life, and I appreciate you having me on. I did write a book called Deputy, 35 Years as a Deputy Sheriff from upstate New York to Los Angeles. So I wasn't a New York State trooper, but I was a deputy sheriff in upstate New York near Rochester, a very rural area. But just happy to be on the show and interested to talk about the movies we discussed earlier.
Yeah, from rural New York to the glitz of Hollywood and Los Angeles and West Hollywood, where we both worked at, which is a big chunk of Hollywood, the Sunset Strip, all that great stuff. Okay, I think we probably need to start getting into a show. Martin, go ahead and start rolling the film clips. And once you get that going, go ahead and bring up It Starts. Well, I guess well, hold
Give me a
on
second.
hold on. It starts. Go ahead and start rolling film, and then I'll do the intro on the movie. Okay, so the movie we're going to do today is Heat, and Heat was released in 1995. It stars some great actors: Al Pacino, Robert De Niro, Tom Sizemore, who I think had passed away recently,
Yeah.
and Val Kilmer, and they were all fantastic in this movie. But what most people don't know about this movie, it was based upon a true story, a true event, inspired it. And there was a cop in Chicago, I believe his name is Adamson, Chuck Adamson. He went on to become a screenwriter and scriptwriter in Hollywood, but he was an investigator and he was tracking a career criminal, Neil McCauley, who actually is the name of our main bad guy, De Niro, in this movie. This was in the 60s, and he was tracking this guy because he knew when he came out of prison, he would start robbing banks and robbing doing armored car heists, and that's exactly what happened. But when he got out, he sat down with him and had a cup of coffee. Just like in the movie, the exchange in the movie was very much like the conversation that this guy Adamson had with McCauley back in the 60s. They did a heist, and they had a shootout, and two of the guys were killed, just like in the movie. One guy got away, and ultimately the real McCauley was also shot and killed. So inspiration for the movie came from real life, and then we moved on to it came from real life, and then the movie itself actually inspired some real life situations. Hey, Martin, I think we lost the chief there. Can put him backstage till we
Yeah.
get him back on. And
No, I think he lost connection.
okay, go ahead and work with him and get him back up. But so this is a great movie. I enjoyed the movie immensely. Cliff, what do you think? Do you like it?
I loved it. I want to follow up what you said. Yeah, Tom Sizemore, he actually died March of this year, age 61, which was crazy. And a couple other guys, remember, Danny Trejo was in this movie, right? Who went on.
Yes.
The great character actor. Yeah.
Henry Rollins. Did you catch Tone Loc in there from that song Funky Cole Medina? He was in there. He played one of the drug dealers.
Oh, John Voight's in this movie. He plays the
John Voight. Yeah.
Yeah, I love a lot of his movies. So a lot of good actors, a lot of high profile actors. So real life story, and put on screen by these real life actors.
Who else was in there, Chief, that we both know?
Okay, you got to help me out on that one, Cliff. Who in there that we both know that I didn't catch?
Ray Verdugo, he played a cop in Las Vegas. Ray Verdugo from LASD Homicide.
Oh my God, that was Ray. Really?
Yeah.
Well, he must have been a technical advisor on the film.
He was.
So I saw they brought some technical advisors from San Francisco for the film. Like that. Why would they bring them from San Francisco? So obviously they had some local talent as well helping out, and he got a credit. So I wonder if he's got a SAG card, right?
I'm sure. I think he probably already had it. I think he and another LASD homicide detective, Art Franson, did a lot of technical advising.
I was working in West Hollywood, and on a film shoot, and they had some LAPD guys doing technical advice for a movie called Cop, I think, with James Wood, and I criticized them because they had the speedy loaders are upside down and all that other stuff, and they said, hey, go get that guy and let's put him in a scene. So I ended up in a scene on that show.
Wow, that's great.
They just see the back of my head and I'm knocking on a door. That's about it. So I didn't get my SAG card. I didn't get any credits, but it was fun doing that. I think they were a little upset that I questioned how they had the speed loader on it because it was a deputy. How do they have the speed loaders on his belt? But yeah, that was a lot of fun. So this is based upon a true story. Let's go ahead and bring up the. Oh, I'm sorry. Hey, welcome back, Chief. Did you like the movie?
I love the movie. I watched it with my wife. It's awesome. But being a law enforcement,
Steve, move closer to your mic. See if that helps. Go ahead.
I said I watched a great movie, but I did look at some things and said, well, that would go down. It's not realistic. For example,
All right, we're gonna take him backstage, Martin, and figure out how we can get him a little better connection. You want to work on that?
Well, there's nothing I can do at this end.
Okay.
Really.
Well, we're going to move forward.
I wanted to bring up, a lot of coming from where I came from in upstate New York, and maybe around the country. I think people would think well, this can never happen. This is really Hollywood taking liberty. But man, when we have the experience we have, I mean, the LA scene as far as so congested and how you can operate anonymously and how, I mean, it's just one street could be one long, it looks like a cement jungle, but yet you've probably gone through 3 or 4 jurisdictions and it's just one city after the other. And of course, it can really happen, and it has.
Well, I could tell you, we're going to bring up some other folks, but what I really saw in these guys is I just saw they portrayed hardened criminals very well, and I really enjoyed that part of this.
Right.
And let's roll the first clip, Martin.
Oh,
it starts.
Can you hear me now, Chief?
I got you there.
Yeah, I hear you.
Let me go to the beginning. And here we are.
There's the call. 3 minutes.
Clear! What I like, let me set this up for our audience who's just listening. So the scene starts as they're getting ready. They've already gathered the resources they need to do this armored car heist, right? And this armored car ends up in an intersection and gets hit by a truck, which flips it over. And the gang goes to work. They blow the armored car, open it up, and get the guards out to steal, right? And what I saw in here, and I believe, although they didn't mention it in any of the background information, that they take this kind of thing from real life. And it reminded me of a story. There's a few things that remind me of a group called the Stopwatch Gang, which actually came out of Canada. And these guys are operating in the 70s and 80s, and they used a stopwatch. When they would do a bank robbery or an armored car robbery, they were down. They would surveil, just like these guys surveilled, in case their operation. They had it down. They had used meticulous detail, and there were 3 guys on this crew. And one of their first big takedowns was a warehouse. They took down I think it was listed at 165,000 gold, but it actually ended up being 750,000 in gold back then. That was the value of it back then. So it was a huge haul for them. And they switched to robbing banks up in Canada. When they got hot, they went down to Florida. They robbed banks there. And when it got hot, they went out to California, which is a big state, and allowed them to rob a lot of banks all over the state. But it's the Stopwatch Gang. And when I watched this, that's who I had read this story about the Stopwatch Gang. That's what this reminded me from. I'm sure that this cop Adamson probably knew about those guys, and that helped influence the script. And as actually, if you watch some good crime dramas, you'll see the bank robbers are all really organized and they're doing stopwatches. And I think it takes from that crew, because most of the bank robbers that I dealt with, they ain't using a stopwatch, right? They're just getting in, getting money, getting out. And I think one of them I chased down Melrose. That old Melrose Place reminds me of the movie. I was chasing him towards Beverly Hills. He's just a young kid who used a note, right? He definitely wasn't as organized as these guys were. But it reminded me, like I sent you guys the Stopwatch crew info. What do you think, Cliff?
It was the FBI out of San Diego that actually dubbed them the Stopwatch Gang, because the one guy, I don't know if it was Reed or the other guy, I think Philip. No, it was Reed. He hung a big stopwatch around his neck. And so they took note of that in the surveillance videos, and the FBI in San Diego dubbed them the Stopwatch Gang. And these 2 guys, they escaped from prison at least twice out of Canada. It's just an amazing story. And Reed survived, and he ended up writing a book. He actually wrote a book. He became in with the head of the prison in Ontario in Canada, and he actually got out and married a gal. And then, man, he got into some drugs and he pulled another bank job and went back to prison. But it was quite a story.
Yeah, I think the other thing about the stopwatch crew, and we'll get into the North Hollywood bank robbery crew guys in a bit, but the stopwatch, these guys were hardened criminals. That's what those guys were. Nothing was going to stop. They escaped prison. They got a chance for a new life, but just by trying to go clean, and they didn't do it. They had to keep robbing. That was their life, and this movie kind of gets into that. And Steve, I wanted to bring you in. So you were a chief at 2 different places. Obviously, you were captain. We have career criminals that live in our community, and they're not going to be deterred by anybody, right? They're going to do their thing. This is what they're all about. When you were up in Fillmore, a little more contained location, kind of a farm community that surrounds it, you had career criminals Santa Paula. I'm sorry. You had career criminals that operated up there, right? That you knew were coming back to town?
Actually, I had a guy that was in prison for murder, and when he got out prison, he came to the station to see me, to check in. My secretary said, "Hey, there's a guy out there who's got tattoos all over his face, and he wants to see you." And so I went out there, and there's this guy, convict, tattoos all over his face. I said, "What can I do for you?" And he said, "Well, I hear you're from LA, and all the homies are telling me, hey, you better go see that chief and check in, man. This guy's no joke." And so it was funny. I told the guy, I said, "Listen, here's how it's gonna work. My boys are gonna toss you once or twice for the next couple of weeks until they get to know you, and after that, you're good." And so, but what I did want to address is, I was a lieutenant in charge of the Sheriff's Academy for 6 weeks. And we teach the recruits role playing, traffic stops, man with a gun, man with a knife. And then I was a sergeant in charge of training at East LA. We never train for a heat or stopwatch type of incident. In fact, the closest I saw in 40 years was a North Hollywood shootout. We do not train for those type of incidents. And if you don't train, you're a lot of times you're going to fail.
Well, I can tell you what I notice in this is there are career criminals that are not going to be deterred. They're going to do their thing. And we're going to there's these things called criminogenic factors. If anybody wants to look those up on our audience, criminogenic factors or criminogenic needs, these guys who feel entitled to the money, they're impulsive, and that's going to come out in the movie in some of these scenes. But that's who these guys are. They're criminals. This is what they do. They're entitled to it. If they can get it, they're going to take it. And that's what I saw in this movie. I think De Niro did a great job at portraying just this career criminal type and all of these guys. And, let's bring up the next scene, Martin, and that's who we are. It kind of caps off this whole armored car scene.
Seconds left. Get back. Get back. Get back.
Hey, Slick, you see that shit coming out of their ears? They can't fucking hear you. Cool it.
I got it. Got it.
You wanna fuck with me? You wanna fuck with me?
So what you saw in this is, so they've got their stuff from the armored car, and they got somebody on their crew who's kind of weak, right? He's a lot of bravado, wants to show how tough he is, and he ends up unnecessarily killing one of the armored car guards, right? And then the guard thinks he's going to die. He goes for a side piece, and then he gets killed. The third guy's got his hands up, and they've killed two. Might as well take care of the witnesses, right? And this leads to some conflict in this gang. And I do think that most professional crews really don't want to kill cops because they know the heat's coming down on them even more. The stopwatch gang, which I talked about earlier, they had a reputation of being polite and avoiding violence, which was one of the reasons they wanted to get in and out, is they didn't want to mix it up with the cops, right? And so, but I called this clip, That's Who We Are, because you know what? We're about getting the money and getting away, and we're not going to let anything get in our way, right? They're willing to kill to get the money. What do you think, Cliff?
Yeah, you sparked a memory of the stopwatch gang. Yeah, a lot of their success came from they would go in and open up accounts in these banks, and they would actually get a safety deposit box just to know the people. People actually know how they went, and then they would wait a few months so that they knew the FBI would look at recent video. It was just an MO they had. But when you talk about these crews, I love the fact that really both De Niro and Al Pacino were team leaders here, right? Who both had codes, and none of the members of their teams ever lived up to their expectations of how they should act, right? I mean, it just seemed to be the.
I was in the paper about a week ago. They had a Romanian gang doing frauds in LA that they just took down. I think LAPD took them down. So they do have these crews, whether they're fraud or whatever it is, that they specialize in, that are out and they're career criminals. And their thing is, hey, we're going to take whatever we can get away with. And that's just the way it is, right? What do you think, Steve?
Yeah, I mean, you brought up a point. So they went to rob a bank, then murder. A lot of motorcycle gangs. You better kill a cop. You can with the head of the organization. But in this, they killed and went simple robbery to now death penalty murder.
Well, we kind of we got every third thing, but I think you're talking about gangsters, and gang members are people not to be fooled with. I think we are still having some audio problems with your. You have a mic that might help, like you can plug in earbuds. It might want to try that. Go ahead and take them backstage and try that. Okay, let's go on to our next clip, the fence.
Before that, for pleasure of our audience, you, Chief, you gave me a picture of a newspaper about the.
Yeah. Let's show that stopwatch gang. Yeah. So for you guys if you want to do a little of your own historical research, here's the pictures of the stopwatch gang, and they can have disguises. One of them had actually become a hairstylist, I think, while in jail, and then used those techniques when they were on the run and also for disguises. So, just check it out. It's a great piece of criminal history, I guess. These guys.
To that note, Chief, before I forget, the guy, because he wanted to escape from a jail again, he knew he had to get in with the warden, and so he took up hairstyling because he figured that would be a way. And so the warden became so enamored with him, he let him on a one-day pass with one guard to go to an actual hair salon. And that's where he went. He said, "Can I use the bathroom?" He went in and went out a window, and that's how he escaped again from prison.
Right. So I think it shows with these career criminals, they're constantly scheming. If they're in the life and in the game, they're constantly scheming on how to stay in the game and how to commit additional crimes. So the next clip we're going to bring up is with John Voight, and it really just talks to, when you're in criminal enterprises, there's an infrastructure you need, and one of the things you need is a fence. Let's bring up the fence scene.
$1,600,000. 40 cents on the dollar, 640,000 to you. 150 front money. Get you the rest 2-3 days. Know who own these?
Malibu Equity and Investments.
Roger Van Zandt. Owns banks in the Caymans. Runs investment portfolios for offshore drug money. Stuff like that.
So?
So, he ripped off his bearer bonds.
Yeah, he's got insurance.
That's the point. He collects 100% from the insurance. He's a player. Maybe he buys his bonds back from us.
So what I like about that clip is it shows that there isn't a criminal infrastructure out there. When somebody's doing burgs, and whether it's just a hype who ripping off jewelry and cash, whatever, they have to turn that around somewhere. I mean, I remember in West Hollywood, remember the old Okie Dogs hot dog stand? That guy was buying stuff off of those guys who were doing those burgs. So he was, in addition to running his own stand that kind of catered to the criminals that hung around in the area, he was buying stuff from them. Usually you only get about 10 cents on the dollar for jewelry and things like that. And Voight, obviously, he's playing a high-end fence here. They've ripped off $600,000 worth of bearer bonds, and he's making a deal with De Niro. Okay, 60% is yours. What's that? That's like $360,000, I think. And then the victim will get paid 100% from the insurance. And if they sell it back to the victim, he can make a 40% profit. I mean, that's their goal. That's what they want to do. I don't know how realistic that is, but it is very realistic that there's a lot of people out there that you can't do this hustle without having people willing to knowingly buy your stolen property. We used to have in West Hollywood Park, there were a lot of Russians that hung around, and believe it or not, they bought a lot of that stolen stuff, from these guys. So there was a lot of people who are maybe not doing the robberies and they're not doing the burgs, but they are part of that criminal enterprise because they received the property. Cliff, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I remember in West Hollywood, I'm pretty sure that, they had the Russian mafia there, had their own little fiefdom going, and then they owned some legitimate business, like if you could call them that. I think they owned the Body Shop, a strip club there on Sunset. And so, man, they were definitely implicated in the whole criminal enterprise of what was going on there with Russian mafia.
Hey, Steve, did you guys take down any fences when you were up there in Santa Paula or in Baldwin Park? Did you get a line on any of those guys that were operating in your area that were accepting the stolen property?
We did in East LA all the time. These junkies would go ahead and commit burglaries, and they'd take jewelry and they'd take it to a particular fence. We hit this one place with a warrant, and they had, back in the day, they had TVs and VCRs and jewelry and hair, anything that they can get cash for. The entire house was full of it. And that's how they drove the drug habit. Because they take it to a fence and they get some money and they go buy their heroin or crack, whatever. But yes, we did all the time.
And there's the latest one. LA City Council passed a law that if you have a catalytic converter in your possession that you can't prove is yours, then that's a misdemeanor now. What most people need to understand about these criminal gangs is 8,000 catalytic converters were stolen in the city of Los Angeles alone last year. If you think about it, you can probably flip those for maybe $300 or $400 to a scrap metal people who then take the precious metal out of it and melt it down and sell it to somebody else. So these criminal enterprises are not just the thief that goes into your car to steal the catalytic converter or the guy who's doing the robbery at the bank for bearer bonds. There's an whole infrastructure that supports that kind of behavior, as both Cliff and the chief has talked about. So that's why that's important. You have to understand that is reality. Those things do happen. Because the other thing is it gives you, if you're fencing you give it to a fence, sell it to a fence, you take your cut, and then they sell it. Kind of gives you a degree of distance if the cops crack down. I mean, I was a burg detective, so we would go and get stuff out of pawn shops that were stolen all the time. And I have to tell you, they had a good scam going, the pawn industry, because you couldn't necessarily take it, right? The person could come back and buy their own stuff at the cost, but the pawn industry had passed some legislation that you had to show that they knowingly knew it was stolen before you could actually seize it. It was really some crazy rules. Clearly, they had spread some money around there up in Sacramento to get those beneficial rules for themselves. But yeah, there's a lot of legal receivers who probably take that stuff knowingly, and then there's a lot, of course, illegal receivers, and they are called fences. So hey, let's bring up the next clip, and this is robbery homicide. I want to introduce the premier investigators on LAPD.
They were airborne. They taped the last few seconds of the black and whites doing demolition derby. Stolen out of Fresno 2 weeks ago. The yellow pickup truck out of Whittier day before yesterday.
You taking this one, Lieutenant? Or does it stay in division?
This look like gangbangers? Working the local 7-Eleven to you? Robbery homicides, take me out.
All yours. We got 3 motorists. All they saw were men with masks. They were distant. Console TV man over there, however, he was closer.
The ID, anybody?
Yeah, what I liked about this clip is, first of all, we have to put out the kudos for LAPD robbery homicide. They're excellent investigators. The Sheriff's Department has a just as capable homicide bureau. But when LAPD has a really tough case, they shift them over to robbery homicide. Even if it's not a robbery or homicide, sometimes those guys will catch the case because it's newsworthy, and these guys are they've committed their lives to investigations. And in LAPD, you can do 2 tracks. You can stay in patrol, which is where I spent most of my time and loved. I did do some investigations. I was lieutenant who oversaw a couple different investigative bureaus. And I like that, but I love patrol better. But the robbery homicide guys are excellent investigators. And you saw the handoff, right? I ran detective crews at a station and at transit, and I was a detective at a station. And of course, the patrol lieutenant, are you taking this one, sir? Yeah, we're taking it. Does this look like gangbangers or a 7-Eleven robbery? A little more cavalier. I always found the robbery homicides to be very professional and very deferential to the locals. You didn't get this talking down to stuff. They were good because they recognize that the locals are probably going to provide the leads to help solve the case anyways, right? So good unit. Go ahead, Cliff. I know you want to say something.
There's a quote that comes, I think, 30 seconds later in this scene, which I just laughed about. I think I was, what about the MO? And he goes, MO is that they're good. I just thought it was great.
Good. Yeah. Hey, did you ever get a chance to work with Harmony's homicide or even our homicide or some of the elite investigative folks on any cases, Chief?
I was at East LA and I was a gang guy, and I love going after the gangbangers. And at the time, this was back in the 80s, I think the last year we were there, we had 54 gang homicides. You're talking about cities that got 1 or 2. We were just a small little station. We had 54 gang homicides. So they were constantly at the station. And of course, all the homicides that I handled, they would show up. And you're right. They're one of the best at what they do, along with LAPD. Just like LAPD SWAT team and LA County Sheriff SWAT team, as well as major crimes and then LAPD SIS. But I did interact with them on many, many homicides. I think I probably assisted or handled in my entire time there. I was there as a deputy, a sergeant, and lieutenant, probably 200 homicides, either handled or assisted with in my entire time there.
Well, I have to tell you, if you're working a big city agency, the volume of homicides that come through or serious cases come through, Cliff, you worked up there in Rochester County. Clearly, they couldn't match the volume that we had down here in LA, right? In terms of investigators.
No, I don't even know what it was. I mean, Rochester's only a city of maybe 200,000-300,000, and I worked 30 miles south of there. We didn't have any homicides in the 5 years. We had one in the 5 years that I was there. But
so when they say robbery homicide, these are premier investigators. We talk about sheriff's homicide in LA. 18,000 employees on the sheriff's department. We police about 3.5 million people. So we get our fair share of homicides, probably a couple hundred a year. But I wanted to give kudos to LAPD robbery homicide. I've always been impressed with those guys. They do a great job. They rolled out on a couple of shootings, deputy-involved shootings that were actually in LAPD's area, and they rolled in and really worked well with our guys, our homicide guys. And just to support what the chief said, Our gang guys are critical to helping solve gang-related homicides. When people say, do we need gang enforcement? Do we need this? Yes, we do. We need to gather intelligence on the gangs to help solve those cases. As you'll see later in this movie, just a pattern that one of the bad guys does is calling somebody slick, leads to breaking over who these guys are. And if you go to talk to a gang investigator, hey, do you know this guy, Chewy from whatever, and they're going to know who he is. And that's the kind of intel you have if you got good police work going on the streets. And I think we're ready for our next clip, which kind of good lead in, and this is Informants. Wait a minute. Did we miss something there?
Yeah, Deepwater.
Deepwater. Let's do Deepwater first.
Yours. Be that as it may, my way you get 100% from the insurance company and take the bonds back from us at 60 cents on the dollar and make yourself another 40%. The operation doesn't skip a beat, everybody makes out.
Sure, you got a deal.
Good, because there's no percentage everyone gets their underwear in a twist over this.
Yeah. So you have your man call me and we'll set the meet.
Yeah. Okay.
Nice talking to you. You gonna deal with these guys? So word's on the street, it's okay to steal my stuff.
What I liked about this scene, I called this scene Deep Water, just because this guy he's going from the shallow water into the deep water, and he's going to play with some really bad dudes because he's mad that they stole his stuff. This is Van Sant. He's the owner of the bear bonds that were stolen, and they're trying to make a deal. The fence has called him up. Hey, you pay us 60 cents on the dollar. You get your stuff back. You clear a 40-cent profit on this because you also get the insurance money. So you come out, whatever that is. Let's say that's $240,000 a head. So that's a good deal, right? And they say that this guy is also involved in money laundering. So he's in the criminal life, but he's a white collar criminal, right? He's not these guys, and he decides that he's going to go in the deep water and he's going to swim with these sharks. And I just thought, these are not guys you want to play with. These are not guys you trifle with. And that's what I thought about this movie, because you look at the character and De Niro just comes off as this hardened criminal. What do you think, Cliff?
Yeah, some of it's kind of a typical with these guys get involved with these criminals that don't really know who they're playing with, right? And so that was a good depiction of him being in a company that he knows nothing about. He's in over his head, as you say. He's in deep water.
Hey, Chief, I know you were a gang investigator, and that's kind of what I think, the community needs when you're dealing with hardcore gangs and hardcore criminals. They really need to rely on law enforcement, not try and take this stuff on themselves, because ultimately it could end badly for them. You kind of agree with that sentiment?
Chief, I worked gangs for so many years. In fact, when I was in Santa Paula, the gangs are out of control. And one of the reasons they hired me as chief was my gang experience. And what you need to know about gangs, it's not the occasional drive-by murder that's the problem. It's the constant fear and intimidation that gangs create in the environment, that I can't send my kid down the street to the store, or I can't go to the park because the big homies are hanging out. So it's the fear that the gangs cause. I've seen one family of gangbangers bring an entire community to its knees. And so when you deal with gangbangers, it's zero tolerance. I had a saying, one active gangbanger in Santa Paula is one gangbanger too many. And the way you deal with them is you just crush them from the beginning. Because if you don't, they're like a virus. Sometimes they're active and sometimes they're not. And when they come back strong. And so
I think one of the reasons why I equate it to gangs, because people will look at gangs who are in the criminal life and that they're criminal gangs and they're relying on that criminal lifestyle. That's why that's an easy linkage to these guys. When I was doing research on this movie, one of the things I found that was so interesting is they actually took some of the main characters, De Niro and Sizemore, who was going to play the bad guys, up to Folsom, so they can talk to prisoners and people who are in that criminal lifestyle and get the bearing. And when I first saw De Niro in this movie, I saw that institutionalized look, and I know you guys know what I mean, right? When they get out of prison, you can tell they've been in prison, right? Just by the way they carry themselves, by the way they talk to you. And only a cop who's maybe worked in the jail or worked on the streets for a long time will recognize that look. And I think De Niro just pulled it off, because I saw that in his opening scene. I saw that and I go, God, he just looks like somebody who's been institutionalized for years. He just throws that off. And so the background work they did to develop their characters, to show that these were hardcore criminals, to show that a cop knows what he's looking at when he sees these guys walking down the street. And he knows that these guys are not to be trifled with, and he better be ready, right? But most citizens don't recognize that, right? But I think De Niro pulled it off. You know, Cliff, you're a Hollywood advocate or a Hollywood aficionado. What do you think? Do you think I'm right on that?
It's funny that you say that, because I went to, and Steve McLean will probably know this story. I went to the academy with a guy named Tom Friday. He goes into the jails and works for a while, and then he decides to go to Irvine PD. And just like you said, he saw a car going south, I think on the 5, and he saw that look, and he went and stopped him, and he confronted him on the side of his police car there, and they got into a wrestling match and ended up down. I think he got his gun and put him in the police car and said, "Drive me to Mexico," I think. And then then he ended up attacking him, and they fell down the freeway, and he got the best of him. But that came from him seeing that look that he learned in the jail.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter the race of the guy. It's just they're institutionalized by being in prison or in jail or both for years, and you know what you're looking for as a cop. And you know, the funny thing is occasionally I would wear 2 stripes, you know, when I was a training officer or whatever, or you hit the street in uniform as a detective, and you wear 2 stripes, right? And as soon as somebody called you that senior, because in the jail they call a 2-striper, the prison, the inmates call a 2-striper a senior. On the streets, they might call you a corporal, and they don't know what it means. But as soon as somebody calls you a senior, you know they've been down, right? You know that they've been in jail before. You know that they know the life, right? And so most people won't understand that, and they'll look at a cop and say, "Why did they pull him over?" Well, because the cop knows what he's looking at, right? He knows what he's seeing, or she knows what he's seeing. Hey, Martin, let's go ahead and bring up the informant clip now.
Do this shit.
Kill walking your doggy.
All right. This cat I was locked up with in Folsom. Did a couple, 2, 3 years. He got out, I ran into him.
And so?
He's a big fiend for action. Now, if he'd said nothing, I'd have thought nothing. But he goes on and on, running down to me how he ain't been doing nothing, and nothing's been going on, and all this other bullshit. So right then and there, I know this cat's got something going down.
Pretty fucking great. Albert, what's wrong with you? You dragged me here. Waste my time like this. You saw a guy on the street who's an ex-con.
That's right.
Well, I am over fucking well. What do you want for that, a junior G-man badge?
Look here, man, you gonna make the call on them portions or what?
Was you kidding me?
Hey, I'm telling you, man, this slick is no motherfucking joke, man.
So what I liked about this is we solve cases with informants, right? That happens all the time. And there's always some ulterior motive for a lot of informants. They want something out of it. And in the initial part of the scene, so he's meeting with some guys who give him information, the lieutenant does. And a lot of long-term detectives and gang guys, gang investigators, they have their informants who are telling them what's going on, right? Some are in the life, or some are just might be people in the community that are giving the cops the tips on what's going on. And this guy initially asks him, "Hey, I need you to take down these guys, and they're up to no good." And he gives him information on his competitor, and he calls him out, "Hey, you just want me to take out your competitor?" But then he does finally give up the goods. He talks about some guy that he was down in Folsom with, and and he uses the name Slick, which was earlier in the movie, and that keys him into, okay, maybe there's something here, and he starts asking more information. And this is where Al Pacino, the investigator here, they start getting a line on who this crew is through this informant. And so informants are critical, and they get kind of a bad rap. Like this one, these guys are guys that are in the criminal lifestyle, so they are bad guys and looking to get a little bit of, and they're trying to build up a little bit of chits, I think, with the law enforcement as giving this information. But a lot of our informants are just good, honest citizens, just trying to clean up their neighborhoods and give us information so that we can help solve crime, so they can live in a safe neighborhood. But information from the community is critical. I think one of the challenges the city of Chicago has right now is they can't get information from some parts of Chicago to solve a lot of the murders in Chicago. Chief, you were an gang investigator. How important were informants to your cases?
Well, I'll give you an example. We were looking for this homicide suspect, and one day somebody called one of my boys and said, hey, I'm not going to tell you who I am, but you might want to write down the cell phone number. So he wrote it down. The next day we pinged it, and it took us to a city, and we surveilled that city, and we saw the homeboy of the suspect come out of house. So we knew that the suspect was in that house. And so what we did is we called our SWAT team, we surrounded the house, and then made the call. And sure enough, the suspect was in there, and we've been looking for him for 2 years. So you're right. Some informants are really good, provide good information, and a lot of them are full of shit, and they're looking to get out of a beef. They're looking to get some money.
Well, we have things called reliable informants and tested informants, and those that aren't, right? So our tested informants are people who, correct me wrong, Steve, they've at least given us information on a couple of different things and it's proven to be true, and then they're considered tested. I think there's a standard for that. Am I right on that?
Yeah, what we do is, I'll give an example. We hooked up with the feds because when you're dealing with gangbangers, you want to put a federal case on them because they have to do 85%. Not like here where they slap them on the wrist. But what our role was, we want to get 3 buys into them in case they kick 1 or 2 of them. We still got them on a case, so we send them in there, get 2 or 3 buys, and then we take them down. So you're right.
Yeah. So there is a little bit of a science to informants, but informants don't necessarily have to be people in the criminal life. They can also just be some mom and pop who is trying to help out. Cliff, you get some good information on the streets from some folks that help you to solve any or capture the bad guy or solve some cases.
Well, let me talk to, of course, on that scene, trivia, that's Tone Loc there, who had that song, Funky Cole Medina, if you recognize the voice.
Oh,
but as Steve was saying, it was so phenomenal. When I think back of, the LA Sheriff's Department, for me, is 25 years ahead of what everybody's recommending now. We were already doing these things. And I mean, the impact we had in the 80s, if you remember, Chief, when we would actually, the GET team and OSS would combine forces with the federal agencies and actually swear some of our detectives in. And they were putting these gangs away on federal charges, and they were wiping them out. I remember Carver Park. I go, what happened to Carver Park down in South Central Los Angeles? Well, they're all in prison. They're all gone. And we had a big impact at that time, and I guess it's gone to the wayside now. But I mean, when they were doing that, it really worked. You had 3 strikes, and you had the combination of working with the feds on federal charges, federal weapons charges, and they were going away for a long time.
Yeah, and I think law enforcement has taken the brunt of the max incarceration heat, but in reality, the community, political leaders, everybody was behind doing something about the violence. As I had a guest on my last show, hey, we were hitting 1,000 homicides every year, and it was outrageous and out of control. And that was gangs, and that was crack. I mean, we're not talking about crack on this show, but it's out of control, and you have to rely on informants in the community to solve those cases. You have to rely on people. I'm assuming that, the chief, he talked about his case. Somebody realized that's a bad dude. We got to get that bad dude off the street. And that's why that information flowed in. I mean, even people in the criminal lifestyle realize that there's certain people we need to get off the street and you get information from them. So we couldn't do our job without informants. They are a critical piece. They're not, what do they call them? What's the negative stereotype they have? I can't remember what word they use. Snitches, yeah, snitches get stitches. I think that kind of thing. No, If you're terrorizing somebody's neighborhood or community, if you're a threat to their community, they're actually doing themselves a favor and their community a favor by giving information. But we actually critically need informants, as the city of Chicago has a hard time getting informants to come forward, has proven it's to their detriment if they don't work with law enforcement.
Chief, can I make a comment here?
Sure, yeah.
You know what I found out that's really funny? So these gang members are all macho, their whole culture is based on fear, intimidation. And nobody will rat quicker than these guys on their cells.
Yeah.
And then while homeboy's in the prison, right? His homeboy's over at his house seeing his own lady.
Yeah.
There's no loyalty amongst gangbangers. They'll be the first one to tell you that. And also they'll be the first one to rat another person off.
Okay, we're coming up on to break there. Martin, are we ready for the break?
Yes, we are.
Go ahead.
Chanel?
Hi guys, this is Gary from Pop Culture Minefield here on KGRA, and we're leaving for our first break. I hope we survive.
Did you know 75% of Americans are chronically dehydrated? If you struggle with focus, run low on energy, or when it's time to finally sleep, you simply can't, this can all be linked to dehydration, and Fuel Up has the answer. Our proprietary formula contains the finest cellular hydration with the strongest immune-enhancing natural ingredients. The Fuel Up system is made up of 3 different incredibly tasting varieties. Wake kickstarts your day with a jolt of caffeine. Play boosts focus while hydrating your cells. Rest not only helps you relax, but also rejuvenates your cells while you sleep. Here's what our clients have to say.
I really don't miss my coffee, and you can tell the difference.
So I'm going to take it for the energy. I'm going to take it for the play. I'm going to take it, all day.
And it works. That's the thing. It works. We love it.
Take the Fuel Up Challenge now, where we offer a Feel the Difference money-back guarantee. Fuel Up for life.
Hey members, the new KGRA DB app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA DB programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA DB.
Oh wow, we survived. Welcome back to the commercial break. Now for some more Pop Culture Minefield on KGRA.
Okay, we are back with Morning Coffee with Chief on Pop Culture Minefield. And we're going to get right back into a couple more clips. Listen, go ahead and bring up the drive-in clip and then immediately follow it up with the It's Worth the Risk clip. So we can, I think we're a little behind time. I want to catch up. So let's do both those clips back to back.
Fuck, behind you.
On the right.
Back to work. LAPD. Gee, what? Where the fuck did this heat come from?
Maybe it's the score they're on to. The place, not us. Because it's been hit a couple of times, something.
Assume they got our phones, assume they got our houses, assume they got us right here, right now. Now, as we sit, everything, assume it all.
Now we're gonna buy the bank package from Kelso.
I'll front that. That's not a problem.
Well, what the hell happens to Van Zandt or 750?
Van Zandt, listen, with the heat we got, you want to play World War II in the streets with Van Zandt?
No, I want my 750. And when he gets a pass?
I got more motivation to whack Van Zandt than either of you. He is a fucking luxury. Our problem is take the bank or split right now. Do not go home. Do not pack. Nothing. 30 seconds flat from now, we are gone on our separate ways. That's it. Chris.
The bank is worth the risk. I need it, brother. We should stay and take it down. That's where I come out.
Oh, we have been taken down.
That's it?
Yeah.
Okay. So what I like about both these scenes is I really wanted to show the drive-in scene just because it's. Go ahead.
We're still on Rumble.
We're down on YouTube.
We're down on YouTube, but we're still on Rumble, so we can comment.
All right, we'll keep going. Okay. So this is what drive-ins have gone by the way of the dodo bird here in Southern California. I don't even know if there's any more drive-ins. So I really wanted to show what a drive-in is because most people won't know what there are, and it's a great shootout scene.
Yeah,
it's a great shootout scene with the bad guys. And in the scene, basically, Van Zandt sends a couple of hitters, hopefully trying to rip off the guys who ripped him off and get his stuff back without having to pay any money, which is a foolish mistake. But of course, the crew is ready for him. And they shoot it out and kill both of these guys. And now they're in the struggle with Van Zandt, who clearly is chasing them. The police are onto them. Al Pacino and his crew have figured out who they are. They got surveillance on them. They bust them as they try to take down a score in a warehouse. These guys walk away because they realize there's too risky. But now they're discussing another operation, a bank robbery, which is going to lead to probably the best scene in the movie, one of the best shootouts in the movie. And what I liked about this scene is these guys are willing to take the risk, right? They're impulsive, they're headstrong, they got the criminogenic factors going on. And I know you guys are going to research that. What the heck is Jordan talking about saying criminogenic factors? But one of them is impulsiveness, right? And Sizemore's character, they ask him, hey, you got all this money, you got all this, why you need to probably back out of this. You're in a good spot. You got a wife and kids. And he goes, no, I'm in it for the excitement too, basically, is what he says, right? Which is exactly part of the lifestyle, right? This impulsiveness, if I can get it and take it, it's mine. I'm in it for the excitement. I'm in it for the camaraderie of my crew. We're going to take this risk. And that's how criminals think, right? That's what they think. That's why when you're trying to reform a criminal, and I've been involved in some of the programs, you have to change that thinking. And you can see these guys aren't willing to change, just like Macaulay back in the 60s. He wasn't going to change. And these guys aren't going to change. So now they're in a fight with they're in a fight with Van Zandt, the guy they did the armor car. They stole his money. They got LAPD on their tail. They got a good score. I think the score is supposed to be about $12 million. They want to take it down. And they're not thinking with the logical head, like maybe the stopwatch crew would, and get the heck out of there. We're gonna do this. We're gonna do this. We're gonna take it down. What do you? First of all, what do you think about the whole the drive-in there, Cliff, and then both of these scenes?
Yeah, I love that you alluded to what Sizemore ends up saying later. The action is the juice for me. That's what he says. So like you said, he said, I'm all in because I'm in it for this. Yeah, and there's some drive-ins. They actually had a little resurgence during COVID. So, but there is one in upstate New York in our summer place that I go to at least 3 or 4 times during the summer. So there's a couple that are actually operating as a profit, I believe. But yeah, what it reminded me also that what's his name had what they call, I guess, and Steve will say, the gang robbery world. They had a layoff guy. Yeah. And it just reminds me, a friend of mine who worked for a task force, there was Los Lomas gang took over a grocery store in Villa Verde outside of San Dimas, and he was off duty cashing a check, and he intervened, and the layoff guy started shooting him in the back. But that's a tactic that that even the street gangs use, having to lay off guy like they did the guy on the roof of the drive-in.
Yeah, I had Bobby Rangel on the show, and he was involved in the shooting while he was working some undercover vice stuff. And as he shot it out with their main guy, the layoff guy shot Bob in the back. If you remember.
That's right.
And Bobby got out and tried to engage him, and that guy got into the wind. They never caught him.
That's right.
But yeah, that's where there's one, there's two. I remember that in the academy. Do you remember them saying that in the academy? Where there's one, there's two. You know, when they were saying, hey, there usually isn't more than just one criminal. There's two. It was a shooting involving Lynn McEwen. Same thing. She shot it out with one guy, but there were actually two guys in that crew. The first guy alerted the lookout alerted to the guy who was doing the robbery down in the sub garage that the cops were there, and so he was ready for Lynn when she came around the corner, and they ended up shooting it out. So yeah, they do have layoff guys. You saw that in the drive-in here, and but you know, Steve, what do you think about that scene? Particularly, you know, these hardened criminals, they're in it. You know, the gang members are in it for the excitement. They're in it for the camaraderie. They're in it for the juice, as Tom Sizemore says.
You know, these guys, just like gangbangers, you know, they want one last caper, pull off one last caper so we go ahead and retire and sit on a beach drinking margaritas. The fact is, they got a criminal mind. And there's a small group of convicts out there that they're committed to a life of crime, and that's going to be their entire life. But unfortunately, they're not rocket scientists, and eventually they do get caught and wind up in prison for that last one more caper for the big payday.
Well, you know, I think when we're looking at today's society, you know, what I really want people to understand, when we let people out of prison, there's a certain class of criminal that's coming out, and they're going to go right back to this lifestyle. When we implemented three strikes in California, it was because we had these small number of people who are committing a high number of crime, particularly violent crime. And the only way to really deal with them was to put them away for a long time. And I've worked on programs where we try to reduce jail population, and I think there's some valuable programs out there that we can look at. But there's a thing that they do when you assess somebody who is worth investing in and somebody who's not. They do an assessment, and they find people who are medium to high to low to recidivate, right? So not all criminals are created the same, right? There's those guys, just like in the show, just like back in the 60s when Neil McCauley and his crew did the armored car heist, just like the stopwatch crew. There are some guys, they're not going to turn away from the criminal life no matter what you do, just like some of these hardened OG gang members. And there are assessments that you can do. So when we have DAs like Gascon or Krasner or some of these other people around the country saying we need to treat them all the same and give them all a chance, no. What I say, no. We need to be doing assessments. We need to assess the risk of these criminals. If they are in it for good, if they're in it for the squeeze, the juice, if they're in it for the excitement and they just love that criminal lifestyle, those are people that we should assess as, these are too high a risk. They should not get the benefits of any criminal justice reform. The people we should be looking at for criminal justice reform are people that are likely to be saved, are low to recidivate. We do have the tools to identify that. We've used them in the past, but we've had these SOROS DAs who just made blanket policies and characterize every criminal the same, and not every criminal is the same. And the fact that these guys would think, hey, let's do that heist, let's use these automatic weapons, let's do that. And we're going to talk about a real life scenario coming up pretty soon here where we see the same types of criminals. Those are criminals we shouldn't be letting out. Steve, I mean, you ran us a couple of small city and of course on the sheriff's department. There are guys that just shouldn't get out. Do you agree with that?
I'll tell you a quick story. So Prop 47, which is one of the biggest disasters, there was a chief of police on a radio show who was making a statement that Prop 47 had nothing to do with crime. And this is a chief in a big city. And I was listening to the radio show, and it pissed me off so much. I called the radio show and I told him I was a chief of police. And the guy goes, "You're a chief of police?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "What he's saying is bullshit." He goes, "Hey, man, can I put you on right now?" I said, "Yeah, put me on." And the story told was we had 4 women murdered. All 4 were mothers. One was a twin who got a stray bullet when some gangbangers got in a shootout. A stray bullet hit her neck and killed her. Another one made the mistake of ripping off a gangbanger, and he kidnapped her girlfriend and forced her to take her to the house, and he murdered her. And then there were 2 others. All 4 of them came out under Prop 47, so-called nonviolent individuals. All 4 of them were gangbangers. All 4 of them were murderers. So Prop 47 is bullshit. Like you said, there's a certain small group of people. There's a lot deserve second chance and third chances, but there's a small group of people, they don't want to change. They got that criminal mindset. And if you let them out like this idiot Gascon does, people are going to get hurt.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that up. I mean, you reinforced my position on that. You know, there's ways to reform criminal justice that take the best of what we know today and the best of what we did in the past. But we do have to understand, you know, prison and jails are about keeping dangerous people out of the community and away from everyone else. We do have the ability to figure out who those guys are, and they can demonstrate over time whether, you know, the state of California actually put something out. I guess I should back up for people who are not from California. Prop 47 was a criminal justice reform that dramatically reduced the sentences on a whole host of crimes in California, and also reduced sentences for a lot of folks. And it's been really, in my opinion, responsible for the high increase in crime in California, right? So that's what's going on. Now I lost my other thought that I was going to talk about, but it's been really part of the increase in crime. And then, of course, we followed up with Soros-funded DAs who do blanket policies like Gascon, where they won't file criminal enhancements for, say, using a gun in a crime. If you're going to use a gun in a crime, that's a big step, right? I mean, a lot of bank robberies, they just give a note, they don't have a gun, right? You know, they say they have a gun, but they don't. But these guys who are carrying guns and willing to commit crimes, use violence to commit crimes, they need to go away for a long time. And the state of California released this study that said, only 48% or 50% of the people are coming back to state prison. So our policies are working. What they don't tell, and this is the misinformation, which is crazy, they don't tell it. LA County sends 30% of the people, or used to send 30% of the people to California state prison systems, right? CDCR. And since they're not really prosecuting anybody anymore, they're not prosecuting a lot of people, that dramatically reduces the number of people who come back, which makes them look like, artificially, they have great recidivism numbers. Oh, recidivism's really low. And of course, I read the report. I'm a data guy, and I go right to the number that I know means something. How many were arrested within the last 3 years after being released from state prison? 69%. That's the number you need to pay attention to. And so we have our politicians and bureaucrats that are hiding the relevant facts. Of course, I had to dig down, and I understand it, and I know what I'm looking for. But most people will just say, 50%, we're doing good. No, what they're doing is they're lying to you. They're not assessing these people for risk. They're letting them out. They're committing crimes. And if they're out of the criminal lifestyle, then they won't be arrested. They won't be arrested within the last 3 years. They'd be completely out. That means the programs that they're working at CDCR to reduce recidivism aren't working. And the efforts that were in the community aren't working. I watched a podcast with former Chief Bratton, the commissioner of New York as well. And he said, hey, I knew Gascon. I liked Gascon. But you know what? None of these Soros-funded DAs are proving that any of their strategies are working. And he's right. They're not.
They're all being recalled. A lot of them are losing their jobs, though. The pendulum is swinging the other way.
It takes a little bit of time. Cliff, what do you think about that before we move on?
Yeah, I think probably their strategy is working. I think that is their strategy, to let all these criminals out. I don't know. There's something going on behind the scenes as far as all these Soros-backed DAs are. I think they're doing exactly what they intend to do, but I don't think they want to succeed in this criminal element. But I like that DeSantis here has removed a couple of DAs, and he's used his powers to try to overcome that.
Yeah, you're starting to see movement. I mean, they tried to recall Krasner in Philly. They weren't successful, and he's now announced that he's not going to run for another term. The guy that filed on those police officers in Atlanta, the whole taser thing where they shot the guy with the taser, he was bounced out of office. Marilyn Mosby in Baltimore, she actually did some financial shenanigans. She was removed from office, and now she's being tried under some federal. The amazing thing is these are DAs who take an oath, and they're one of them is now going to be on charges, federal charges. She's facing some federal charges, and of course they got rid of Chesa Bodine up in San Francisco. The interesting thing is recently the governor who has some ambition in California to run for president. Now he brought in the National Guard to help with the drugs, fentanyl, up in San Francisco, which is crazy because for the last 3 years, you've heard none of these people talk about how terrible the war on drugs was. But he's bringing in the National Guard to deal with the war, to deal with drugs in San Francisco now. Because why? Because crime is going up. People are losing faith in him and his policies, and he wants to be relevant after he leaves office from California, whether that's to run for president or get some appointment somewhere. I don't know what it is. But now he's bringing in the soldiers. Sounds like a war on drugs to me up there in San Francisco. And I know why he chose San Francisco, because they got rid of Chesa Boudin and they got a D up there who's not really a hard law enforcement or hard on crime DA, but she's a lot harder on crime than Boudin was, right? So he's got a partner he can work on. And the mayor also is flipping the switch on that, a liberal mayor, but now, we got to do something about it. We're losing the Tenderloin district. Businesses are leaving. Whole Foods is leaving San Francisco. Can you imagine not having a Whole Foods in San Francisco? What are all those people going to do who buy food at Whole Foods? They don't want to go to an Albertsons, or they want to go to Whole Foods. What are they going to do? But they're leaving because business can't thrive in an environment where there's a lot of crime. So anyways, I thought that was a great clip. It got me a chance to get on a rant here, which and help you guys help me out on that rant. Let's bring up our next one, because we do really need to talk about.
Chief, that's going to be a problem if we continue showing clips. We're going to get taken down again.
Oh, really? Is that what the problem was? Okay, well,
yeah.
That's why YouTube shut us down?
Yep.
Oh, wow. I thought we were following all their rules. Okay. Well, let me talk about the clip. Basically, what's going on is they realize that LAPD is following, right? And so when LAPD follows them, they decide to pretend like they're going to do a hit in some junkyard area. And so they draw LAPD in to do surveillance on them as they look like they're plotting their next score. And as LAPD is monitoring them, they move away and they wait for LAPD. And then LAPD moves in and they are surveilling LAPD. And they actually do a workup on who Al Pacino's character is to figure out who is that chase them. They realize that it's robbery, homicide. They realize that these are serious investigators who take down serious crews. And that's part of the problem for them, right? They realize, oh God, we got these. So they're evaluating. This is where, hey, is it worth the risk? They got this guy's on there. So they realize they need to dump their surveillance, and so they can do this bank robbery. But you guys, I know I didn't work dope, but I know that when you're working dope, you have to watch out for counter surveillance, right? And that happens all the time. But that same thing with gang members. I know when we were trained taking down bank robberies that we needed to park further away from the bank and make sure we got our head on a swivel looking for that counter surveillance. Hey, Steve, what do you think? Can you tell me a little bit about your experience with counter surveillance, working gangs, or even any search warrants with narcotics or anything you did in your career?
One thing about criminals is just like we do surveillance on them and we know their tactics, they know our tactics and they use some of our tactics, and they obviously use counter surveillance, especially when they're looking to do something big. But so that's, it's funny. When I used to leave the station at East LA, I had my life threatened a couple of times. I'd pull out of the station, I'd drive about 100 yards, and then I'd hang a U in the middle of the street just to see if I was being followed. And then I'd do the same thing. And eventually I'd hit the freeway. But yeah, they use counter surveillance, and they've got their own tactics. And, over the years and decades, they've learned, you had mentioned that when a cop sees someone, they know that the guy's been in prison. But you know what? A convict can know when an off-duty cop walks in the store. A good convict will say, you know what, that guy's a cop. Just like we do them, they do the same thing to us.
Yeah, that's true. And, actually, I've seen shootings where law enforcement gets involved in shooting, and they're really on top of a problem, and there is counter surveillance, or there are layoff men as we talk about it. Cliff, did you ever face a challenge with counter surveillance working the streets of either in Rochester or in LA?
Not really. And I think this scene was kind of an ode to the scene at the drive-in, right? Because I think this was De Niro saying, because now Pacino's there and he goes, who the target is? It's us. Oh man, okay. game on. So I think, it was like De Niro getting back at him. You got me at the drive-in. Guess what? Now I got you. You know what I mean? I think it was. And also, I'll tell you an Al Pacino story real quick. My wife had dinner with him at Trader Vic's out of the Beverly Hilton. And it was just 3 or 4 of them. And so Pacino did something that we don't do as cops, right? You know how my dad would never as a cop, he always faced the door. He couldn't have his back to people coming in. And so what Pacino does when he has dinner, like at Trader Vic, he puts his back to the restaurant so that people don't see him, which I think is a good tactic, opposite way normally think, because we may not recognize them, but they'll recognize us. So if we had the opposite, we had our backs to the people, we might not get recognized. I just thought that was a great tactic that he actually uses.
Since we're not getting video clips, I do have some time to answer some of the questions from some of our folks that are following us here. One is, if stop and frisk and 3 strikes policies were the solution, we wouldn't be where we are today. The constant Soros back DA talk is what? What is that? Is sick. Okay, well, I kind of disagree with you there. I mean, first of all, stop and frisk is how the opponents of that strategy labeled it. It was never stop and frisk. You have to stop. You have to have some reasonable suspicion that they're up to no good. That was a label placed upon it by the opponents of law enforcement, and say that it was unconstitutional and that it was wrong. Now are there examples of maybe cops didn't do it the right way? Yeah, I'm sure there are, but the vast majority of police officers, when they're properly trained, they know how to do contextual stops. They know how to do it within the Constitution. And here's the deal. I mean, Sacramento is trying to pass legislation where you can't even ask consent to search. The whole thing about consent to search is it's within the Constitution. If you stop somebody, most people will give you consent to search, and you ask permission. Can I search? You're abiding by the Constitution. If you have a reason for being there, the reason to talk to the guy, and you could talk to anybody you want to on the street, that's all within the Constitution. And ask them, can I search? And they give you consent, and you search, and you find dope, you find a gun. That's all within the Constitution. That is reasonable and practical, and those are good strategies that we have all used our whole career. Why they say, yeah, you can search me, I don't know. Even if you're a properly trained police officer, even if you have the authority to search, you always ask for permission. Why do you do that? You do that because you're going to face a challenge in court. You're going to go through, I think it was a 1358.5 or whatever, some motion to suppress evidence. And if you've asked for permission and they've given you permission, well, they're done with that suppression, right? Then they have to show that that permission was granted under duress or some other thing. And then if you have the authority to do it, then they have to overcome that hurdle too. So I think, one, stop and frisk, it was portrayed in a negative light, particularly in New York. It really wasn't the practice of law enforcement, at least not my experience. We always trained people how to recognize reasonable suspicion. And a lot of things that people don't understand is if you know who the players are, you know that they're under the influence, you know what you're looking for, you have a lot more authority than people think. They don't recognize your training experience. What do you think about that, Cliff?
Yeah, I agree that was totally mislabeled, probably on purpose. That they think they were just stopping and frisking everybody at will, and like you're right, there was more to it than that, and they didn't arbitrarily just pick people out. So that was just mislabeled, and it's one of the tactics that people use to try to back the police off of taking proactive police work. So yeah, that was just, and it breaks my heart to see this happening. I mean, yeah, I don't like to see how the total profession is being bastardized, and it's just terrible because I think of all of the inroads, especially the LA sheriffs made over 20 years ago. We were doing cultural diversity, and we were educating ourselves in communication and all that we did. And we had mental health people. They suggest mental health people going with the police today. We were doing that 20 years ago. We had the MET teams, medical evaluation teams going with us, and we had inroads that the rest of the country, I guess, haven't even done to this day. But it breaks my heart to see them doing this to our profession.
Yeah, I got another question. I'll throw this one at you, Steve. And basically, it says, what information, or what does the patrolman, what information can they collect for investigators? Can you explain the relationship between an investigator and the guy working the street?
Well, the patrol guy, what is it's intelligence. For example, a patrol guy stops a couple of people who they believe to be gang members, but yet we don't know who they are. They take that information, they fill out the card, and they give it to the detectives. And if someone commits a crime, they got that information, and it could lead to the suspect. And so they're out there giving intelligence. But the sad thing that kind of leads to what you were talking about, nobody's making any traffic stops. The officers are sick and tired of being beat down, called criminals, called this. I spent 40 years in law enforcement, and I never seen morale so low. I mean, do the cops, every time they stop someone, they got 50 people putting a cell phone on their face. Everybody wants to be the next person to catch somebody getting beat. You know, you tell someone, you stop someone, for example, like I did. I stopped a lady. I was the captain because she was driving at nighttime with her lights off. And as soon as she rolled down the window, she's got a cell phone in my face saying my lawyer's on the phone. I'm not talking to you. And you know what? They're sick and tired of it. That's why recruitment's down 60%. Retirements are up 50%. Everybody wants out, and nobody's making traffic stops. Basically, if it doesn't come in over the radio, I see nothing. The 20 gangbangers are sitting on the corner. The 10 drug dealers on the corner slinging crack. Don't see them. I'm just going to drive and answer my calls because I don't want to go to prison and I don't want to lose my job, or I don't want to be indicted because I made a mistake and actually hit someone in the head when I meant to hit him in the shoulder. They're sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Correct. Yeah.
There's a great book out it's called The War on Cops. I read that book. There's a follow-up book. I forget the name.
Great book. I read it.
Comes out of the Manhattan Institute. And for the folks who are curious about stop and frisk and some of the other strategies and things we did to lower crime, go ahead and read that book. It'll give you another perspective, because the only perspective you're hearing is perspective that right now the left and the news media want you to hear. But there are other people who are doing great work. You can find them at the Manhattan Institute, the Hoover Institute, the Independent Institute. Oh my God, think tanks that are actually looking at data to come up with a different opinion than what's presented in the news media. Yeah, they do exist, and Manhattan Institute is one of the best. You can look them up and come to your own conclusion after you read that information. But I've read that book. I live this life. That's why I'm saying it's the Soros-funded DAs that are part of the problem, or a big part of the problem. And as the chief talked about, it's this Ferguson effect where everybody's pulling back because they don't want to be the next victim sacrificed in court just because they're not abiding by what the left wants in terms of criminal justice. And I'm a reformer. I've implemented criminal justice reform on a much small scale, but they were successful programs that have expanded in LA County. So I do believe in looking for good ways to solve old problems, but you keep the best of what you did in the past and you keep experimenting to get better. And we're going to go right into I want to talk about the bank robbery and the shootout. That's the most important thing. Unfortunately, we can't show the clip, so I'll have to explain it. So these guys are planning a bank robbery. See, they got information that at a certain time of day, there's going to be some payroll money there totaling about $12 million. They've managed to jury rig the alarm so it won't go off right away. So they got a little extra time. They're going into these banks. They're armed with fully automatic weapons. There's 4 of them. They pick up a driver last minute because their driver, Danny Trejo, somebody's on him. It turns out that it's Van Sant's men that are on him, not the police. But he thinks it's the police, so he backs out. Last minute, they get a driver. He's God, I forget his name, but he's a tall black guy. I've seen him in other stuff. Really a great actor. And so they do the robbery, and they're going to the bank. And of course, there's no real shooting in the bank. They don't really want to shoot it out in there. They just want to get in, clean, get the money. They're very well organized. You can see them doing the whole stopwatch thing. This much time, and they're walking out. One of them's already in the car. Obviously, the getaway driver's in the car. A third guy gets in the car, and the fourth guy recognizes that the police are there. In the meantime, somebody, an informant, Van Sant's people, tip off robbery, homicide, that this robbery is going down there. And Al Pacino and his crew are running down there. They're calling in the army, and they're trying to block these guys off. The patrol guys are setting up roadblocks. And Pacino with rifles, which was unrealistic at the time. They didn't even have rifles in the cars for the police. it would have been hard pressed for me to believe that robbery homicide was going to run out there with semi-automatic rifles to take these guys on. But that's part of the show, right? So him and his team are out there, and as soon as the guy who plays Chris in the sign, who's the actor now? But he opens up on these police officers, right? And he takes a couple out, and De Niro gets out. They open up. They open up a little bit. They get in the car. They try to get out there, and all the police shoot at them. The driver gets killed. The car crashes, and they get out, and the shootout is on. It's on. It's big time. Now, these guys actually trained with some special operators. I think it was special forces guys came in to train these guys on how to shoot. So they looked real good in how they were doing shooting. They were advancing with their weapons towards the police. And this is so reminiscent. This shootout is so reminiscent of what happened in North Hollywood. Martin, can we bring up the
Yes.
photos from North Hollywood and just place them up there for a few seconds and then go to the next one? I think we got 3 of them. Here's the first one. So this is what the bank robbers looked like at the Bank of America in North Hollywood, very much like the show. And here they are again. Again, they got body armor on. They got fully automatic AK-47s, and they got their masks on, just like in the movie. And this happened a couple years after the movie. So the movie influenced real life. Here's the SWAT guys went and got an armored car to try and do rescues. They had 12 police officers that got shot in this, 8 civilians, some of them seriously injured. You can see the car was all shot up there. This was a seminal event in Los Angeles County, and this was an earth shaker for LAPD. And let me lay the backdrop for this a little bit, and I'm sure, Steve, you can chime in if I get something wrong. LA City has a police commission, and they did not let these. They argued over whether they should have hollow point bullets, which were standard for us. They didn't want them to have any rifles; they're too offensive. We can't have rifles; that's too offensive. They just had their 9mm. Some of them just had 38s, and then they had their shotguns. Right now, on the sheriff's department, we had rifled cars at the time. There weren't very many. I think the sergeant many times went out with a rifled car. But we all had rifled slug, too. They couldn't have rifled slugs. And a rifled slug is an ounce of lead with rifling on it that can be used in a pump shotgun that gives you a lot more accuracy than just the regular double odd buck or number 4, whatever LAPD was using. And it could have taken those guys down fairly quickly if a few guys were shooting an ounce of lead at them, and they could actually reach out and touch them from 60 yards away, right? So that's what we had, but LAPD wasn't allowed to have any of that. So they get in this massive shootout that lasts 44 minutes with these guys with AK-47, drum magazines with 100 rounds in it. The bad guys fired off somewhere between 11 and 1,200 rounds themselves. And the LAPD shot off about 600 rounds back. And so before we get into the end of that shootout for LAPD, Steve, just talk a little bit about the policies that led up to the fact that, or the thinking that led up to the fact that LAPD didn't have the right equipment, and your opinion on that.
Yeah, they didn't. Back in '94, I was still in SWAT. And at the time, I believe that the only officers that had long rifles were the sergeant. North Hollywood changed everything. In fact, after that, I had M4s put in every single police car. When I went over to Santa Paula, I had M4s, semi-automatics put in every police car, but they were only in there and they were locked, in case they needed them. But that shootout, they were outgunned. I mean, they had to call SWAT, but being a former SWAT guy, I know that at the soonest that you can get there, unless there happens to be someone off duty close by, and there was, and I knew one of them, but it takes anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour to simulate the entire SWAT team, get the ballistic vehicle there. And so you've got to have it right there in the car. They weren't ready. They had to go to a gun store and said, give us everything you have, give us all the ammunition you have. But it was really scary, and it really changed law enforcement as a profession. And now everybody has long rifles in their car, every officer.
Hey, so Cliff, you're out there working the streets. and you know that this is this could happen to you. It's only fair. You're willing to take a risk, right? You're willing to risk your life. You're willing to put it on the line for the community. But you should have the equipment necessary to take down the threats, right? I mean, that's basic. And sometimes our politicians don't get that. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And these guys, Monteserrano and Phillips, they met in. Of course, this happened in '97, like you say, 2 years after Heat. But they met in '89 or something. They met in '89 at Gold's Gym in Venice, and they bonded over bodybuilding and weightlifting. And then they started getting together. And someone even mentioned in the comments that they confirmed these guys used to watch Heat and similar movies like it. And so they've got a lot of tactics from that. And these guys, and they don't talk about it too much, but these guys pulled numerous robberies before they did this B of A in North Hollywood. And they did actually an armored car before too. So
they were career criminals, budding career criminals. They had a couple of armored car rights. I just want to comment on one of the things. Good left groups are big supporters of proper policing. Yeah, I know we tend to come off a little conservative on the show, but what I recognize is good people who want a good society are willing to look at all the options. And when I talk about criminal justice reform, I want things that work. And I think some of the policies that we're implementing now don't work, and you can't even question them at the time. But one of the reasons why I wanted to bring up this scene is there is an attack on law enforcement, that law enforcement is too militaristic, right? That law enforcement shouldn't have certain equipment. Well, that was the thinking before North Hollywood. Yeah. They shouldn't have this, they shouldn't have that. And then we have this massive shootout in North Hollywood, and the police are outgunned. Several of them are seriously injured only because they didn't have the equipment and the political leaders didn't want to look bad. So that's a failure of leadership on their part. This was obvious these guns were out there. It was obvious this is a challenge. When I was the chief of transit police and security, we were evaluating what we wanted our guys to carry, and I got a chance to go and shoot some fully automatic machine guns, which was a blast. I'm not a huge gun buyer, but it was a lot of fun. I shot the M4 and I shot MP5s. Is that what we were carrying? I think.
That's nice.
Yeah, and I was actually pretty good. I did hit that big gong on the hill there with both of them, Steve. So I was. For a commander, I still had it, right? But I really want my guys, if I'm going to send guys out there, they have the equipment necessary to face all of the threats. And sadly, all of those threats include active shooter situation. As we saw in Nashville, that shooter went into that school with a semi-automatic rifle, ready to kill a lot of people. I want to say fired off 80 to 90 rounds. Went to the high ground, was ready to shoot it out with police. That was the next target. And you saw those guys rushing on their body cam, and they had the rifles ready, and they were willing and ready and able to take care of that shooter. And that's exactly what they did. So when you hear the politicians say, well, the police look too military, they shouldn't have this, they shouldn't have that. No, when it goes down, you want them to have it. In the Nashville thing, they killed 6 people, right? 6 people, and would have killed more had these guys not had the right equipment to take that shooter out. Had LAPD had the right equipment back in the day in North Hollywood, they'd have taken those guys out way more than 44 minutes. It had happened a lot earlier, and the patrol guys would have taken out. And in fact, they did end up taking out one guy. They shot him, they disabled his weapon, and the guy ended up killing himself, because he was on his last leg there, and he knew what was coming, and that was prison for a long time. But then the SWAT operators got there, and according to LAPD's report, they got there about 18 minutes into the shooting, which is actually pretty quick. And if you watch the whole video for the North Hollywood shooting, they're in their running gear. So 3 of these guys are out running. They hear what's going on. They jump in their hoops, and they get to take home marked cars with machine guns, and they head there. Throw their vests on, and they head there because it is game on, and the patrol guys are outgunned. They're down. Some of them are dying, asking for help, and they get there and they start rescuing citizens and they start rescuing officers, but also they devise a plan to deal with these guys, and it changed what equipment they carried too, right? If I remember correctly, Chief. But they end up taking on the second guy, and they use different strategies for taking him out by shooting at his feet. Steve, can you talk about the SWAT guys, and did North Hollywood change the equipment they had, and it had changed their thinking?
Well, you know, I knew one of the guys that was in the shooting there in North Hollywood, and if you remember when they came head to head with that white truck that was trying to get away, and they blocked him in, he laid down, and he was trained and smart enough that he was skipping rounds underneath the truck, and he took him out at the ankles. And it did change everything, not only with the weapons, and what you need to understand, and I told this to the principal, she asked me, why do you need an M4 on campus? I said, it's very simple. If an active shooter comes on campus, a big campus, you can't take a handgun and shoot 100 yards, because if you try that, you're going to kill a student. On a big campus, you need a long rifle. Even with a fixed sight, you can take a headshot at 100 yards. And why do we need the ballistic vehicle? Simple. The only way that I'm going to get on that campus or in close to a bank and without my boys getting killed is that ballistic vehicle. And so I brought one over to Santa Paula that I got for free, because the city up north, the council said it looked too militaristic. And I said, well, that's okay, because I'll take it. And I got it for free. And that thing was $750,000. As a leader and chief of police, you have an obligation to give your officers all the equipment that they need to keep themselves, not only to keep themselves alive, but to get into a campus or to get into a house with a ballistic vehicle to rescue someone that might be injured. And that's happened in the past. And so, you know, for the people that don't like that equipment, sorry, can't help you. But if that's what it's going to take to keep my boys alive, I'm going to do it. Now, not every chief thinks like that. Some are too weak, and they won't do it. They don't got a spine. But this chief, I gave him everything. I gave him that Bearcat. I gave him the M4s. I bought him brand new ballistic vests. And you know what? The community had no problem with it. Said, Chief, whatever you think you need, we trust you. And they supported that. It's just you got some cowards out there, you know, that think it doesn't look right, too militaristic, so we can't have it. Well, you know what? We can't help you.
Well, there are, as we've talked about this, there are times when you got to be a little more sensitive. I know I was doing a demonstration at the federal building. It was an anti-war demonstration, and it was at the West LA, and it's a gathering point where they always did it. And I had a couple of squads, and I was the incident commander, but they were going to march from the federal building to the local armory where they were doing a command change with the general, and they were going to try and disrupt that too. So I had the same guys, and we were doing kind of a soft approach. Nobody had their helmets and batons and any of that kind of stuff on as we policed the anti-war demonstration. But as they started marching down towards the armory to disrupt that that change of command, I was not going to let that get disrupted. So as soon as they started leaving, I had my one squad go over there, tell them put their helmets and batons and get all that stuff ready to go, because we're ready for action if they try to break that fence and get in to disrupt that service. And we rolled down, and we're the very same guys. Of course, we got a lot of jeers and anger, but there are times when you have to show a tougher stance, show force, use that equipment that gives a little more of a militaristic look for the challenges that you're facing, right? And there are times to use the Bearcats or the tanks, and there's times not to. So I understand the criticism of the community that, you know, if you're just dealing with a protest, having anti-ballistic trucks out there or your stuff isn't necessary. You should have a softer approach as long as they're just exercising their freedom of speech. But if they're there to disrupt and be violent, then you got to be ready for them, and your folks have to be ready for them. And that's just kind of how I look at it. It's really responsible leadership by the chief or the incident commander who's handling the situation. What do you think?
You're exactly right. You got to use wisdom. When I first became chief, we had a military vehicle parked on the side of the police station, and one of the local presidents of a organization stopped by and said, Chief, can you do me a favor? When you come into the city, the first thing you see is that ballistic vehicle next to the station. It just doesn't look good. Would you mind moving it? And I looked at him. I said, you know what? You're right. I agree with you. And so I moved it and I hit it. And the only time that I would use that ballistic vehicle was when I served a warrant on gangbangers. Every time I went to serve warrant on gangbangers that were known to have a propensity for violence, I took that thing with me and I put it right in front of their house so they could see it. And once they saw that thing, they wanted nothing to do with it. But you're right, you have to use wisdom. It doesn't look good just roaming around the streets. You got to use it wisely. But when it comes to the safety of officers, I'm going to show strong principled leadership, and I'm going to do what I have to do to protect our officers, regardless of what anybody says.
Keep in mind, 8 civilians were shot at North Hollywood too. So had the LAPD been able to reach out and touch those guys sooner, maybe wouldn't have had 8 civilians shot as well. And, you know, we have one comment: the military mind, kill enemy, and the police officer mind, protect the public, don't seem to work well. Well, unfortunately, you know, we're in law enforcement today with terrorism and high level of guns in society, particularly these semi-automatic weapons, the things that you saw at North Hollywood. You have to have the capability to deal with those threats. And as Steve talked about, you just got to be responsible about how you do that. And I understand the criticism when we have chiefs or incident commanders who are a little irresponsible in how they use that equipment. But that's a training and a correction. That is, you don't take away the equipment because somebody might use it incorrectly and somebody might be offended. You change the mindset of how that particular leader is using that equipment. You get to that point, but you don't take away the equipment necessary for these officers to save the lives, but also to save the lives of people in the community. What do you think, Cliff?
Yeah, I agree. And Steve would probably, along with yourself, go, you know, people, you know, working East LA, I'm sure the chief, and when I was working in Linwood, you know, it wasn't popular publicly, but behind the scenes, man, people really supported us. I mean, I'm so happy you guys are here. The public was really behind it. It's mislabeled by the media that they're not. You know, one program that Sheriff Baca had that at the time I wasn't too supportive of, or I didn't think it was very popular, was the Civilian Academy. So yeah, we need more training always, but you know what? Everybody that went through that Civilian Academy, that learned how the sheriffs operated, man, they become the biggest supporters of the department. When they learned what we did and how we did it, they were just like, I can't believe what you guys do and what you put up with. So I think we need more training. But man, if we could train our fellow citizens, which we need the partnership to operate, that would be a big plus.
Yeah, we do this. I've done this 38 years, Steve, more than 40, I think. And then Cliff, you 35 years. People won't understand this. And that's one of the reasons why I want to do this podcast is I want to get the information out so people hear another perspective. You know, I want the responsible use of equipment. I want us to be able to protect the community, because it's really about protecting the community. If you let a madman run around with an AK-47 shooting people and you can't take them out because you don't have the proper equipment, that's lunacy in my mind. And I think back, I think it was San Bernardino County. We had a couple of terrorists come from the Middle East. One was a citizen. He brought his wife here, and they decided to kill a bunch of people at his employee Christmas party. And those guys had to then find those folks and take them down. They were heavily armed. They had all the necessary equipment to take them down. Those are the kind of situations we have. When I was the chief of transit police and security, and I was in the anti-terrorism game, you know, we had two likely attack scenarios. One of them is small improvised explosive devices, and the other was active shooter. And as long as we have these active shooter situations, as long as we have these weaponry on the sheet, and you can argue for or against Second Amendment, that isn't the argument I'm making here. As long as that capability is there, law enforcement needs to have at least capability to match the bad guys, but actually they should have the capability to overcome the bad guy, because really their action is to save the community and to keep the community safe. That's what it's all about, and that's why we need this type of equipment. The next scene that we were going to show is paid the price, and this is where Van Sant, the money changer, you know, so these guys, they did the bank robbery, they're on the run, and De Niro's character, he wants to settle some scores before he goes, right? And he wants the traitor who informed upon him, this Wargo guy who initially killed the armored car guy, who also, as the movie goes on, it shows the plot line where he killed a prostitute and is likely responsible for killing other prostitutes. And he likely led the team that that killed Danny Trejo and his girlfriend, right? So he wants a little payback, and that is very consistent with the prison mindset. And guys are down. You disrespect them, you come again, they're going to come after you. This is whether you're a gangster in a street gang or you're just a career criminal like this. This is what they do. It's a lack of respect, and there's a code of the streets, and they're going to pay you back. And I think that's what this is about. And the first scene that I called the scene "Paid the Price," and this he's looking for I think Wargo. He's looking for the long-haired bad guy, that the rapist, the killer. He wants to take this guy out, and at the same time, he's trying to get out of Dodge. Right? He's trying to do the stopwatch gang. He's trying to get out of Dodge, take his money and his girlfriend, and get out of Dodge. But he finds out where Van Sant is, and he decides, well, I'm gonna take care of this guy first. And he goes up to this guy's wealthy pad, and he wants to know where his turncoat is. And the guy says, I don't know where he is, and he shoots him right there. And what if you're going to swim with the sharks, if you're going to go in the deep end here, you're going to pay the price with these guys. And that's what I saw with Van Sant. He went in the deep end, and he got killed, right? But De Niro gets the information on where Wargo's at from his fence guy, who's got some information. And it's interesting, the LAPD made sure that information was out on the street, which I don't know how often that happens. I haven't seen that kind of thing, but they make sure the information where Wargo is out on the street, the main bad guy, the killer. And De Niro wants him. So before he's going to leave, he decides he's going to take him out, and he pulls the alarm at a hotel where this guy is at as a distraction. He managed to get a security jacket. All of this stuff it's pure Hollywood, because I can't see this stuff happening, but it was great cinema. And he goes up there and he kicks the door, and there's a scene after the shooting I really want to talk with you guys about, but he kicks the door in. Yes.
We'll have like 3 minutes, so
okay, I'll have to wrap it up.
It's the pace.
Okay, so he goes in and he kills this guy, but there's a scene, and we're going to miss it. After he kills Wargo, he comes out, and there's an LAPD officer that's got him at gunpoint. And he tells him to freeze, put his hands by him, and the guy backs up towards him. It just reminded me of Raymond Lewis George so much. The guy where they trained these tactics over into these criminals, trained these tactics. He knew what he was going to do if he faced that situation. He backed into the guy, got a chance to turn around, disarm the police officer, and kill him. That is what you're facing with career criminals. Do you think? What do you think? What do you think, Cliff?
Yeah, you know what? As soon as you just said that, I remember that they would show those films of the prison videos of those guys training how to disarm officers when they're being searched. And boy, you're right. That was right out of that. Just how they train in state prison, and they train with each other. Hey, I'll be the cop, now you be the suspect. Yep. And you know what? He had a plan when that happened. That's a good observation. Yeah.
Yeah, you remember that. You trained that, I'm sure, in the academy too.
Yeah, exactly.
Steve? Yeah. So these guys are ready for law enforcement. They face law enforcement. Hey, how much time do I have left for wrap up there, Martin?
Oh, like 1 minute.
Okay. Well, I want to plug a couple of shows. First, I want to plug the Cliff Yates Show. Cliff, tell us about your show.
Real quick, the Cliff Yates Show. It's a podcast. It's on YouTube and on all the podcast platforms: iTunes, Amazon, Spotify. Also, I got a book out, The Truth About Cops and Why You Should Trust Them, and then Deputy, 35 years as a cop from upstate New York to LA. Okay, on iDetective, which is on KGR Radio. It's one of our other law enforcement shows. It's a show about cops, for cops, and it comes on at 3 o'clock Pacific Standard Time on Wednesdays. And then there's Search Warrant. A bunch of cops also do the Search Warrant show, and that one comes on at 11 o'clock in the morning Pacific Standard Time. So you'll have to do the math where you're at, but they talk about more about current events going on in society today. I really want to thank you guys for coming on today, and it's been a great discussion. Hopefully we can have you guys again. And you guys mind, after the show is over, stick around for a debrief and we can talk about the show. Martin, I think we're all wrapped up.
Chanel, take us out.
Those sons of bitches.
Ma, I'm doing a show.